What if one tiny element people suddenly had less food? It's not nitrogen. From farms and smartphones to fight element 5s that helps feed the world.
Imagine waking up tomorrow and just a single, highly specific chemical element has completely vanished from the Earth.
Yeah, that would be pretty much immediate chaos.
Right. I mean, within seconds, if you step outside into the freezing cold, the screen of your smartphone just shatters right in your hand.
And it gets worse. At the local power grid, nuclear reactors would suddenly lose their primary stabilization mechanism.
Exactly. You're suddenly risking uncontrollable meltdowns all over the place. And if you somehow survive that, give it just a few weeks, and the global food web begins to completely collapse.
Oh, yeah. We're talking a catastrophic agricultural disaster.
Apples, wheat, almonds, soybeans, they just all fail to grow. It sounds like science fiction, but today we are doing a deep dive into element number 5.
Boron.
Yes, boron, the ultimate hidden pillar of our daily lives.
We're going to unpack how this element, that honestly most people have never even heard of, quietly acts as this invisible building block of modern civilization. It really is fascinating. We walk past it, we eat it, we rely on it for our most extreme technologies, and yet it remains almost entirely unknown to the general public.
Which is crazy to me.
Right. I mean, the scale of what boron actually does compared to its total lack of fame is a huge disconnect. Like, it doesn't sparkle like gold, you know?
No, definitely not.
And it isn't driving a massive battery hype cycle in the news like lithium, but it literally sustains nature on one hand and then enables our most cutting-edge engineering on the other.
So let's look closer at that starvation scenario from our sources, because the idea that pulling one obscure element out of the dirt causes global agriculture to fail, that seems really intense.
It does, yeah.
We're kind of conditioned to think of fertilizers strictly as like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? The big three you see printed on every bag of plant food.
Right, but those are the macronutrients. They provide the bulk biological building materials.
Oh.
Boron, however, is what we call an essential micronutrient. Even though a plant only needs these tiny trace amounts of it, boron essentially acts as the cellular construction manager.
The construction manager. So what is it actually doing on like a cellular level that makes it so indispensable to a crop?
Well, it basically creates structural crosslinks in the plant's cell walls. So if you picture a plant's cell wall, it's largely made up of a web of complex sugars, specifically these things called pectins.
Okay, pectins.
Yeah, and boron physically binds these pectin molecules together. It locks them into a rigid grid.
Wow, okay.
It also regulates how sugars are transported throughout the plant's vascular system. And crucially, it's the primary driver for pollen tube growth, which is, the mechanism plants use to actually reproduce.
Okay, that immediately explains why the crops fail in our little thought experiment. Because if the pollen tube doesn't grow, you don't get successful fertilization.
Exactly. No fertilization means no seed.
And no seed means no almond, no apple, no tomato. The plant is just completely sterile.
Yep, 100%.
And going back to the cell wall binding thing, I mean, that is essentially the mortar in a brick wall, right? Like the nitrogen and carbon might be the heavy bricks, but the boron is the mortar holding the whole matrix together.
That is a great way to look at it, yeah.
Or, to put it another way, it's like that one hidden piece in the center of a Jenga tower. You barely notice it's there, but if you pull that specific piece out, the structural integrity of the entire tower is just compromised.
The plant literally distorts and collapses under its own metabolic weight.
It is wild.
Yeah, the roots weaken, the leaves become super brittle and curled, and the stems actually often grow completely hollow.
Oh, wow. So it just kind of rots from the inside structurally.
Basically, yeah. And this presents a massive ongoing challenge in modern agriculture. I mean, farmers can't just blindly apply nitrogen. They have to constantly monitor the soil for boron deficiency.
Because if a region's soil lacks it naturally, they're forced to introduce highly targeted boron fertilizers.
Exactly. We genuinely could not sustain the crop yields required to feed 8 billion people without strictly managing this one specific micronutrient.
Look, it's basically keeping global famine at bay. But, it seems incredibly strange to me that something so critical to basic biology remained hidden from science for so long.
Yeah, it is weird.
I mean, humanity has been smelting iron and working with copper for thousands of years. But according to the sources, boron wasn't officially discovered and isolated until the 19th century.
Right, 1808 to be exact.
But we were technically using it way before that, right? Like ancient civilizations cleaned with borax and used it in metallurgy, but nobody knew what they were actually handling.
Yeah, they had no idea. And the delay in its discovery comes down entirely to its unique atomic anatomy.
Let's get into that.
So boron is element number 5, meaning it has 5 protons, but its chemical behavior is dictated by its valence shell, its outermost layer of electrons. And it has exactly 3 outer electrons.
Okay, so in chemistry, elements generally want to achieve a full outer shell, which is usually 8 electrons, to reach stability, right?
Yes, exactly.
So having just 3 puts boron in this frustrating sort of middle ground.
It places it squarely in the category of a metalloid, so it gives it somewhat of a split personality chemically.
How so?
Well, it doesn't freely give up its outer electrons like a true metal would, which is why pure boron is actually a terrible conductor of electricity at room temperature.
Okay.
But it doesn't behave like a typical non-metal either. Instead, it desperately wants to share its electrons to complete that outer shell.
Right.
So it forms these incredibly strong covalent bonds with elements like oxygen.
Which explains why it's never found just sitting alone in nature. It is always clinging to something else, hiding inside complex minerals.
Exactly. Ripping it away from those oxygen atoms requires a massive amount of concentrated energy.
I imagine. And that difficulty actually fueled this intense scientific rivalry in 1808 to isolate it.
Oh yeah, it was a massive race.
So in England, you had Humphrey Davy trying to force the separation using electrolysis. He basically built a massive battery to run powerful electric currents through boric acid, hoping to just shock the boron free.
Yeah, literally trying to zap it into submission.
And meanwhile, across the English Channel, you have the French chemists, Joseph Gay-Lussac and Louis-Jacques Thénard, and they were using chemical reduction. So they heated boric acid with potassium, relying on the highly reactive potassium, to rip the oxygen away from the boron.
I just love the visual of this high-stakes 19th century bake-off to isolate element 5.
Right. But the reality of that race is that both teams technically failed to produce perfectly pure boron.
Yeah, they did.
The covalent bonds were just too strong to break entirely with the technology they possessed back then. So they ended up with these brown, highly impure powders. I mean, they proved the element existed, but they couldn't fully tame it.
Which is so fitting, honestly, because their difficulty highlights the most important aspect of how we use boron today.
Ons.
Yes. We almost never utilize pure boron metal. Its true utility, the reason it is foundational to our civilization, lies in those unbreakable covalent bonds. It's the boron compounds that do the heavy lifting in our modern world.
So let's follow those unbreakable bonds out of the agricultural fields and into our homes, starting with that shattered smartphone screen from our opening scenario.
Yeah, let's talk about glass.
Because if you are looking at a modern digital display right now, you are literally looking through a boron compound.
You are. High-end displays, alongside things like laboratory glassware and durable kitchenware, rely on borosilicate glass.
So how does that work?
Well, when manufacturers bake boron compounds into a standard silica glass mixture, the boron atoms physically integrate into the silica matrix.
And ordinary glass is famously susceptible to thermal shock. Like when standard glass heats up, the atomic structure vibrates and the material physically expands, right?
Yeah.
And then when it cools down rapidly, it contracts. And it's that uneven expansion and contraction that creates immense internal stress, which causes the glass to just completely shatter.
Right, like if you pour boiling water into a cheap cold glass, it'll just explode. But introducing boron alters that thermal behavior completely at the atomic level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the boron-oxygen bonds in the glass matrix are incredibly strong and rigid, so they act as a microscopic shock absorber.
That makes sense.
When the temperature fluctuates rapidly, this rigid boron network basically prevents the overall molecular structure of the glass from expanding or contracting too much.
So that's why you can carry your smartphone from a freezing winter street into a heavily heated building, and the screen remains perfectly intact because the boron physically restrains the glass from warping.
Exactly. It provides immense durability under environmental stress.
It's just wild how something so small does so much.
And we see that same chemical rigidity scaled way up when we move from consumer electronics to like military-grade supermaterials.
Right, let's talk about boron carbide. Because if you combine boron with carbon, you get one of the craziest materials on Earth.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, carbon already forms some of the hardest materials we know, like diamonds. So fusing boron into that mix must create an unbelievably dense lattice.
It does. It creates a complex, interlocking crystalline network that ranks among the hardest materials known to science. It is significantly harder than standard steel.
But steel is so heavy.
Exactly, and that's the defining advantage here. Because boron only has 5 protons, it is a very light element. So boron carbide offers this exceptional, extreme hardness with just a fraction of the weight of traditional metal armor.
Which is the holy grail for aerospace and military engineering. I mean, you achieve maximum kinetic resistance without grounding the vehicle because it's too heavy.
Exactly.
And this is why boron carbide is heavily utilized in bullet-resistant body armor plates, attack helicopter shielding, and even modern tank armor.
Yeah, it literally physically shatters the incoming projectile because those covalent bonds in the boron carbide just refuse to yield to the kinetic energy.
They just won't break.
Right. The material intercepts and dissipates the impact.
And, okay, if we push this concept of intercepting extreme energy to the subatomic level, boron is also critical for managing nuclear reactions, right? Specifically through an isotope called boron-10.
Yes, boron-10.
So that is an atom with the standard 5 protons that make it boron, but it carries 5 neutrons in its nucleus as well.
Right, and that specific nuclear arrangement gives it a highly unusual property. It has an enormous cross-section for neutron absorption.
Okay, let's break that down. Inside a nuclear reactor, energy is generated through fission. Heavy atoms like uranium are split, which releases massive amounts of heat and loose neutrons.
Right, the loose neutrons are the key.
Those free neutrons then strike other uranium atoms, causing more fission, which creates a self-sustaining chain reaction.
Exactly. And if that chain reaction outpaces the facility's cooling capacity, the core overheats and you get a meltdown. So the reactor requires a braking system to control the rate of fission.
And that's where boron-10 comes in.
Yes. Boron-10 acts as that brake by absorbing the loose neutrons floating around the core, like a subatomic sponge.
It's a sponge for dangerous neutrons.
Yeah, it's remarkably efficient at capturing them. But the most vital mechanism is what happens after the capture.
Right, because a lot of elements become violently unstable and emit highly dangerous penetrating gamma radiation when they absorb an extra neutron.
Exactly, which you definitely don't want. But boron-10, however, absorbs the neutron, briefly becomes boron-11, and then it decays by splitting into lithium and a helium nucleus, which is basically an alpha particle.
So it safely dissipates the nuclear energy as manageable alpha particles rather than the lethal gamma rays.
Yeah.
And this is why engineers manufacture control rods out of boron-heavy materials. I mean, they can lower these rods into the reactor core to physically absorb the neutrons and throttle the fission reaction down, or they can drop them in entirely for an emergency shutdown.
Without that safe, stable absorption capability, managing a nuclear power grid would require vastly more complex and hazardous dampening systems.
It's terrible.
But honestly, the most fascinating part is that medical science is now taking this exact same nuclear mechanism and using it to fight cancer.
Wait, really?
Yeah, through a process called boron neutron capture therapy, or BNCT.
I definitely want to break this down because the mechanism sounds like actual science fiction. You aren't just blasting a tumor with broad radiation, you're essentially turning the individual cancer cells into localized nuclear targets.
Exactly. So medical researchers design specific boron delivery compounds. Often they attach boron to an amino acid that cancer cells metabolize rapidly. Because cancer cells reproduce aggressively, they consume these boron-laced compounds much faster than the surrounding healthy tissue. As a result, the boron heavily concentrates almost exclusively inside the tumor itself.
So they're basically tricking the cancer into eating the boron.
Exactly. Then the patient is hit with an external low-energy neutron beam. And these slow-moving neutrons are relatively harmless as they pass through normal human tissue.
Right, they just pass right through.
But when they hit the boron-10 that's now concentrated inside the cancer cell, the boron captures the neutron and triggers that exact same decay reaction we just discussed in the power plants.
Oh my God. The resulting alpha particle and lithium ion carry a tremendous amount of kinetic energy, but they're relatively heavy, so they stop quickly.
Very quickly. They only travel a distance of about 5 to 9 micrometers.
Which is roughly the diameter of a single human cell.
Exactly. So the nuclear reaction physically shreds the DNA of the cancer cell from the inside out, completely destroying it. But because the energy dissipates so quickly, the healthy cell sitting immediately next door remains largely undisturbed. It is incredibly precise, localized destruction at the cellular level.
It is genuinely remarkable that the precise atomic behavior keeping a nuclear reactor from melting down is being harnessed to clear malignant tumors without destroying the surrounding organ.
It really is.
And I know BNCT is still specialized and not yet a widespread everyday treatment, but it just proves how highly adaptable this element is. I mean, we even see it extending heavily into the aerospace industry now.
Oh, for sure.
The strength-to-weight ratio we talked about with tank armor makes boron fibers incredibly valuable for spacecraft and satellite construction, right? Where literally every gram of payload costs thousands of dollars to launch into orbit.
Exactly. And boron-based heat-resistant ceramics are also used to shield spacecraft from the extreme thermal shock of atmospheric reentry. It just continually comes back to relying on those rigid covalent bonds to resist structural and temperature fluctuations.
Okay, so with boron driving literally everything from global agriculture to our digital infrastructure, our nuclear grids, and our aerospace ambitions, the obvious question is, where do we actually get it?
Good question.
Because if it refuses to exist purely in nature, how are we extracting the immense quantities required for global industry?
So we basically mine it from heavily concentrated evaporate deposits. Millions of years ago, ancient lakes rich in dissolved boron minerals existed in volcanically active regions.
Okay.
As the global climate shifted, these lakes evaporated, the water disappeared, but the heavy boron compounds minerals with names like borax, kernite, and colemanite, they were left behind, crystallizing into these massive valuable beds.
So the modern supply chain is entirely dependent on locating the ghosts of these ancient dried-up lakes.
That's a poetic way to say it, but yes.
And that requires a very specific geological history, which means the supply is probably not evenly distributed across the globe.
No, the geography is highly concentrated. You have significant mining operations in the U.S., particularly in the Mojave Desert, as well as in Argentina, Chile, and China.
But the undisputed giant of global boron reserves is Turkey, right?
Yes. Turkey controls a massive, strategically vital percentage of the world's accessible boron.
Which is wild to think about geopolitically. As we shift deeper into high-tech manufacturing, controlling the supply of element 5 becomes a serious geopolitical lever.
Oh, absolutely.
But extracting millions of tons of this stuff and spraying it on crops or processing it into industrial chemicals forces us to look at the environmental equation, like what actually happens when it builds up in the ecosystem.
Well, it operates on a strict Goldilocks principle.
Meaning not too much, not too little.
Exactly. In agriculture, we established that plants desperately need that microscopic construction manager to build their cell walls. However, if industrial runoff or overfertilization leads to excessive concentrations of boron in the soil or water, it quickly becomes toxic to those exact same plants. Yeah, it disrupts their metabolic processes and can severely damage sensitive vegetation.
So it's a very delicate biological balance. A trace amount prevents agricultural collapse, but a surplus poisons the very crops you're trying to sustain.
Right, but the critical distinction to make here is that boron does not behave like heavy metals.
Right, things like lead, mercury, or cadmium.
Exactly. It doesn't bioaccumulate in animal tissue, magnifying up the food chain to cause long-term neurological damage in humans or apex predators.
That is a huge relief.
Yeah, it is highly water-soluble, meaning it eventually washes out of the immediate environment. Though localized water toxicity remains a serious issue that definitely requires strict runoff management and responsible mining practices.
Sure, but as long as we manage the extraction and application properly, it doesn't represent an existential toxic threat to the food chain.
Exactly.
Which is fortunate because our reliance on boron is only accelerating. We've talked about its current uses, but the horizon for element 5 involves some of the most critical technologies currently in development.
Oh, we are just getting started. Material scientists are heavily focused on utilizing boron in solid-state batteries.
Which are supposed to be the next big leap for EVs.
Yeah, these batteries aim to replace the flammable liquid electrolytes in current lithium-ion cells with solid, highly conductive materials, drastically increasing both the safety and the range of electric vehicles. And boron's unique bonding characteristics actually help stabilize those new solid electrolytes.
There is also intense research into hydrogen storage, isn't there?
Yes, massive research.
Because one of the biggest hurdles to a green, hydrogen-based economy is safely storing the gas without relying on massive high-pressure tanks.
Right. And certain boron compounds can chemically absorb hydrogen and release it on demand.
It's acting like a chemical sponge for clean fuel.
Exactly. Add in next-generation semiconductors, advanced catalysts for green chemistry, and even theoretical applications in commercial fusion energy. And you realize boron is essentially the scaffolding for our technological future.
We're discovering new crystal structures made from boron atoms constantly. The chemical story of this element is very much still being written.
It really is.
So, to bring this all together for everyone listening, boron, element number 5. It is probably never going to capture the public imagination like gold.
No, probably not.
And it isn't dominating the financial news like silicon. The vast majority of people will go their entire lives without ever realizing how heavily they rely on it.
Yeah, it operates entirely in the background, just woven completely into the fabric of daily life.
But it binds the cell walls of the crops, keeping billions of people alive. It absorbs the thermal shock hitting the glass of the smartphone you're likely holding right now. It catches the rogue neutrons inside nuclear reactors, stops the kinetic impact of military munitions, and provides the structural integrity for satellites orbiting the planet.
It is the invisible backbone that allows modern engineering and biology to function.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. We've seen how boron bridges the gap between our oldest survival necessity, which is agriculture, and our most cutting-edge frontiers in aerospace and medicine.
Right.
If this single stubborn 3-electron element is the key to unlocking solid-state batteries, targeted cancer eradication, and perhaps even fusion energy, is it possible that element 5 won't just be the unsung hero of our past, but the ultimate defining building block of humanity's next evolutionary leap?
That is a fascinating question.
Definitely something to chew on the next time you eat an apple or drop your phone.